Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and this is another live stream chat, so thank you for joining us. In this live chat, I'd like to talk about the new globalist, the new world order command and control model, how once sovereign Western governments have been replaced by a globalist cabal, and now our politicians in the West are appointed, directed, controlled, told what to do. They report into this globalist cabal, that they have no independent freedom of movement. So sovereign governments in the West just simply don't exist anymore, whether it's the American White House or the Westminster in England or in Germany or in France. It doesn't matter. They're all now taking their directions and orders from the globalists. And this, whether it's mass migration or climate change, it doesn't matter. The orders are coming in and they're doing as they're told. The citizens now have no voice. So it's now painfully apparent to whoever has eyes to see that sovereign Western governments no longer exist. With the possible partial exception of Japan, the entire first world is without a single sovereign government that's elected by the people and responsible to the people. We almost have to pause for a moment to let the enormity of this realisation sink in. The once mighty British Parliament at Westminster that held the world in awe is reduced now to a pathetic rubber stamp, a bunch of dirty-kneed salespeople pimping their country out to the globalist cabal. The United States Congress and the office of the United States President are now shadows of what they once were, even a generation ago. And they're now populated by fawning puppets whose mouths move only to spew out globalist-approved talking points. The great palaces of Paris, where Louis XIV and Napoleon Bonaparte once proudly stood and majestically stood, holding all Europe in awe, are now the scene of globalist-installed puppets running in circles, pretending to be important, while carrying out the orders from the globalists to deceive, racially replace and mislead their fellow citizens. So there's really two issues, I guess, to cover in this live stream. The first is to look at some of the possible reasons as to why Western politicians have been and remain to be and are so eager to sell out their own fellow citizens. The second is, as Western politicians have become, in effect, middle managers, just part of some propaganda delivery system, desperately trying to keep up the pretense of being in charge, while in reality no longer having the power to decide who comes across their borders, and they're running around trying to justify grotesque untruths as scientific fact. It's rather sad because that's their only role now. They're middle managers reporting to the globalist cabal. So looking at the first then, the Western political class have lost all sense of patriotism, all sense of identity, and see their fellow citizens as every bit as alien as an illiterate third world peasant that just arrived illegally into the country. They no longer see that they have anything in common with many or most, or if not all, of their fellow citizens. This is an astonishing development in itself, considering the patriotism of even a generation ago. I mean, World War II, where patriotism was a huge issue, was less than 100 years ago. I mean, it's 70, 80 years ago. It's hard to believe that then patriotism, and even after that Korean War and so on, patriotism was the beating heart in most people. But today, it's certainly in our political elites at least, it's disappeared. The possible scenarios as to how this came about include a situation where they have been led to believe, but we're assuming the globalist cabal here, to believe that a substantial deterioration in the world economy, and a serious deterioration in the world economy, is simply unavoidable. No matter what happens, no matter what's done, it's going to go to hell in a handbasket, or so they're being told, and it's going to usher in a future level of poverty that's going to look sort of medieval and feudal in its proportions. Possibly as few as in a feudal type society, 1 in every 350 people will have independent wealth. The rest will be just universal basic income serf peasants. Now, there's nothing can be done about this, so don't fret about it, don't stress over it. So this is why the Western economies today must be managed to go downhill until absolute bottom is reached. So they're being told, just accept the inevitable, look after yourselves and your family, because there ain't enough lifeboats or cash to go around. So steal what you can, grab what you can, stuff it in your pockets. Forget about your fellow citizens. They're finished anyway. They're gone in this particular scenario here. So just look after yourself and become corrupt in the same way as some piss poor South American banana republic. The other option as to why the politicians have lost all patriotism and or lost completely the relationship with the voters is if you just look at the family members and relatives of politicians. Now, we're talking a situation of straight bribery here. So these politicians or the relatives have been gifted super well-paying jobs, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly in the financial sector. So these are people that couldn't hold down a job sweeping the floor, are given jobs paying $1, $2, $3, $4 million a year in the financial sector, and they're the relative of some politician. And we can think of Hunter Biden here as an example of how this sort of scenario works out. Now, some of this is quite blatant. The never had a job wife of a senior politician is employed in a multi-million-dollar per year consulting role at a big bank. I mean, she couldn't count to 10, for goodness sakes. The same bank extends a remarkably generous series, incredibly generous series of housing loans to this politician, or through his wife, and then also arranges for very cashed up Chinese buyers to come in and buy these properties. These properties they bought for $5 million, interest-free loans, which didn't seem to require any paying back, by the way. And then the Chinese investor will come in and 12 months afterwards will pay 10, 12, $15 million for that same house. And that's all arranged and shepherded and controlled by this big bank. Now, needless to say, the politician does as he's told. He's being very well looked after, and he's being wealthier than he could ever have dreamed of had he not sold out to the big end of town here. Another politician's good for nothing son was employed as a consultant by a large financial institution and put up in a luxury downtown pad with an expense account for white powder and hookers, and a lot of expenses there were paid up. And this is not, these are just two examples, but it's happening all over. And if we just go through also things like shares, the politicians are often given front-running packets of shares that and they're loaned the money. It's interest-free. They loan the money to get these shares, and they sell them at windfall profits and put this in their pocket. And they're doing this through wives or children or other relatives, brothers, sisters, cousins, or whatever. So it's clear that the main shaker movers in imposing the globalist project, in this case the big financial end of town, are directly, or mostly indirectly at least, richly rewarding any Western politicians who are in any way influential and will do as they're told. The daughter of another politician, on the day she turned 18, was hired as a special advisor to a large, well-cashed-up NGO and paid $200,000 a year, plus very generous 5-star travel expenses. Now, all these politicians that are receiving these benefits strongly support mass migration of third world peasants into the West. They strongly support a climate change scenario that transfers wealth from the West, particularly the middle and working class, into the pockets of, say, the Chinese and the Indians. They strongly support transgender bathrooms and all these sorts of things that destabilise white Western society. And they're also the ones that are out most of the time talking about the eternal universal evil of white people and how white supremacy is the biggest threat and so on. And of course, these people, as I say, are receiving many, many benefits. And this is what the big end of town wants. They want this mass social destabilisation, particularly of the white population. And they're getting it and using these politicians, of course, to do it. The final possible option is that the globalist machine holds something over these people maybe some super embarrassing act that's caught on film that would bring complete disgrace on the politicians and their families. Maybe the politicians are being subject to dire threats. And let's not sell these globalist guys short. Look at what they did to Trump. They could effortlessly conjure up a tearful waif-like girl with a torn blouse. He tried to rape me, she sobs. And then that's front page news everywhere. Look what they did to Kavanaugh, for goodness sakes. Or maybe the politicians told your son at college is about to have his dorm room searched. Many kilos of white powder will be found, and so on. So the globalists have the power to get to and persuade whoever they want. Prison guards can be made to fall asleep on demand. Surveillance cameras can mysteriously malfunction. The mainstream media will ignore any story they're told to. So which is it of the above options? The notion that a politician would sell out their country and citizenry for money seems difficult to accept at first blush. Some of them maybe, but surely not all. And we're talking pretty much the entire body politic across multiple countries is under the controlled by the globalist. But so we're talking pretty much the entire Western body politic, not only at federal level, but at state and local level. I mean, have they all been bribed and bought off? Is that even possible? I mean, could you intimidate that many people? I mean, just the scale of it. The threat and intimidation scenario seems a more likely path for the globalists to take, but holding compromising information on that many politicians seems a step too far. I mean, do all of them have peccadillos of some sort? That seems unlikely. Given the globalist control of the media, they can invent any crime narrative they want and embarrass anybody they want and just invent evidence and it can run, given they control the mainstream media narrative, it can run for weeks and that would be enough to destroy most people. So they can really intimidate whoever they choose to. I mean, these guys can rig presidential elections. So, I mean, exactly what is beyond their capacity? My guess is that it's probably a mixture of all of the above. You know, unemployable, low IQ barmaids like AOC will casually and carelessly sell out their fellow citizens for some ideological nonsense that they don't really understand themselves. And they can do it without so much as a backward glance. Other politicians who would be flat out getting a job as a supervisor in a takeout chicken shop can be easily swayed and dazzled with money and baubles, and there are plenty of them. I mean, these guys wouldn't be worth more than $40,000 a year in the real world, and so you wave a couple of $100,000 or a few $100,000 in front of them, and that's enough to dazzle them. We've all noticed how the general IQ of politicians at all levels has possibly never been worse than it is today. This is another thing, that the party machines, you know, the Democrat and Republican Party machines and the Labor Party and so on, they're making sure that there's a good supply of two-bit flunkies that are being put into the parliaments around the place and the congresses and so on. And these people are easily controlled, easily swayed, and their eyes are easily dazzled and so on. And political advisor staff, they're all a bunch of punk college kids. And there's some bright, but Jesus, not many among that lot. Threats to family members, one imagines, will be taken very seriously, you know, by any politician, given the inability to adequately protect the threatened party, the son, daughter, whatever, to adequately protect them from harm, or to even hold the perpetrators accountable due to the globalist control of the public prosecutor's office and also control of judges and judicial office holders. They could do whatever they wanted there. You know, look at Roger Stone and situations like that. They can do what they want and get to pretty much who they want. So however you look at it, though, in the Western body's politic must hate their fellow citizens or see them as beneath and below contempt. If so, how on earth did it come to this? It seems a step too far and hard to believe. I may disagree with people, I may not think much of people, but this level of hatred and contempt, it seems out of all proportion. So let's now look at the neo model of global governance. This is how they're now governing. We looked at how they may be controlling the politicians there. Those in the business sector may have noticed that since the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, the model for corporate financial control began to change. The boards of directors and the CEOs of most companies, the big companies in particular, ceded actual day-to-day control and overall strategic control They ceded it to the big financial houses, the fund managers, the BlackRocks, those sort of guys. The big financial end of town could run up or down any stock price they chose. They had a lot of power, these guys. They could run up, they could push up a price or push a stock price down whenever they chose to, whenever they felt like it. Payouts and bonuses the CEOs and the board and the senior managers were closely tied, in some cases absolutely tied to stock prices. So it goes something like this: the big bank can come and say, "Well, do what we want, do this, do that." And what we'll do is we'll make sure that make sure you set your budgets around a stock price of $50. Come the end of the quarter or half year or whatever it is, we'll make sure the price runs up to $51 on that day. So you'll get your multi-million-dollar bonus payouts. We'll drop it after. We'll lower the boom after that, but we'll do that. And these guys have got the power to do that, and they do it. And can do it without even breaking a sweat. And payouts and bonuses, of course, were tied to these prices, and so they were pretty big. Big finance control of the media similarly could glorify a CEO or a senior manager or disgrace him. So CEOs, it came to be that CEOs and boards existed at the pleasure of the big financial houses. Somebody, if you incur the displeasure of these guys, you're out, you're finished. And the managers and the boards of directors, the CEO, they knew it and were suitably humble and accordingly compliant. Similarly, the big financial house that comes, we want this guy, we want that, we want you to have a good look, we want you to look good for the social justice warriors. So can you put a black lesbian on the board? Fix that by tomorrow. Here's some candidates. They've got that level of control. The CEOs are nothing but bum boys running around doing the fetching and carrying. Now that model of control was effectively transposed to the political realm. So instead of doing that to CEOs and boards and so on, they were doing it to the politicians. Now, just look at the power that the big financial end of town had, and it had far more power in, say, the year 2000 than it did in 1980. So their relative power had increased. So you think about you're a politician wanting re-election or a president or anybody. These guys can squeeze credit, so they can make credit dry up. So suddenly everyone's doing it tough. Consumer goods aren't being bought and sold. The economy is slowing down. Jobs are being lost, and so on. So they can squeeze the credit or expand the credit, and they can do that as they feel like it. The stock market can be made to collapse, or it can keep on rising. They can do either one whenever they want to. The funds to bail out whoever, could be General Motors or anyone, could be made to appear or disappear. Thousands, tens of thousands of jobs could be lost if the wrong company goes under. So they can prop up these companies or not. If the politicians behave, then they'll look after them in this sense. Some jobs could be sent offshore as they were, or masses of jobs, millions upon millions of jobs could be sent offshore if the funds decide to do that. Jobs can be made to vanish if they want to. Politicians' campaign funds can be generous or non-existent. Politicians can get well-paid, prestigious jobs for their idiot relatives, or the idiot relatives, or even the politicians, can be charged with mysterious criminal offences. Again, the young waif-like girl sobbing, "I was raped." They can make those people appear whenever they want. Politicians who didn't toe the line were suddenly subject to things like rape allegations, or obscure improprieties would be magically discovered and come to the surface around election time, and also be given front page news. You had to do what you're told, and these politicians knew it, and no one really is prepared to stand up to it. So it came to be that one day Western politicians woke up to find they were all employees, or rather fetch and carry flunkies of the globalists, and were taking orders from them. The globalists had some influence before with, say, bringing women into the workforce, getting divorce laws off the ground, that sort of thing. So it's some influence. Getting Ronald Reagan to give amnesty to the illegal Mexicans that were in California and so on. But between 1991 and 2016, the globalists were close to achieving total hegemony across the Western world. So all was well, as the globalists saw it, with the world that they'd pimped And then along came 2016, and we now know that the game is not over yet. And we hope that the Globalist Party does not prevail for all of our sakes. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.